Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Dr. Luca Iandoli, Associate Dean for Global Programs at St. John's University and co-author of Elegant Design. Luca, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. I'm delighted to see you, even if it is virtually.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Thanks a lot for having me, for this opportunity to share my work with you and your followers.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, listen, why don't we jump right in, because it's an exciting topic. And in your new book, Elegant Design, you underscore something that I'm sure marketers are very much aware of, and that is that visual information is everywhere. You also say that companies and individuals are competing to conquer the public's scarce attention by inventing distinctive visual formats to stand out from the crowd. All right, well, talk about what that means to marketers and to brands in an age of constant information overload.
Thank you, Deborah. So, the whole book is based on this idea that we can leverage beauty and art and elegant design to better understand and process complexity and complex information in particular. So the problem we are facing now is that we know already that human attention is a very scarce resource in general. It's limited, it's fleeting, but this problem has been made worse by digital technologies, just because the amount of information we are inundated with is growing exponentially every day. And so this creates a number of problems. One problem is that, and these problems are very important for marketers. One problem is that whatever message, even good messages get, lost in this huge amount of information. The other problem is that even if the message catch the user's attention, the customer's attention, it might not be remembered, because one problem with our working memory in our brain is that, and the book is based a lot on brain science, on cognitive science. One problem is that when we overload our working memory, which is very limited, the process of transferring this information to the long-term memory is impaired. And so for the moment, maybe we notice the message, we even appreciate the message, but then we forget it. So what is a way to counteract this? The way to counteract this is to package information in a way that increases the chances of being noticed and memorized. And so in the book, we provide a number of ways, practical ways for marketers and product developers and designers that are based on the way artists work and what we can learn from the way they work. Because great artists, that's what they do. They package information to make it very relevant and very memorable. So there are a number of things we can learn from them. These things include basically a few things that we explain and describe in the book. The first one is basically the assumption that information can be organized and distributed in different ways. And there are some ways are better than others. So we need to understand which are these ways. The other point that we make in the book is that we should not be scared of complexity, because actually users and customers want a little bit of complexity. They might enjoy complexity. And then we can talk more about this. And what I want to say right now is that good complexity is achieved when we are able to provide a lot of meaning with less information. So the effort for marketers in general is this: how we can minimize the amount of information we give to people, but at the same time, we don't sacrifice meaning. And so, putting together messages that are able to combine these things is the challenge. And the book provides some tools to do that.
Well, that's amazing, because right now what you've done is you've put up kind of a dialectic. It's art and it's science. It's simplicity and complexity. It's being minimalistic yet being deep and meaningful. I mean, this is a very hard subject to bridge, and in many ways, it's the secret to so much of what you say being remembered and perhaps standing out at a time of information overload. Let me just run through a couple of things, because I'd love to touch on a lot of those points. But obviously, creativity is very much connected with marketing and without doubt, art. You make the statement that there is no recipe for creativity, which I certainly agree with. But so what does that mean? What does that mean for brands and marketers if there is no recipe for it?
Yeah, I'm happy you citing that, which is the title of the section of when I think it's the second chapter at the beginning of the book, and it's a little bit of a pun with it because the chapter contains an interview to a famous chef. So as part of our studies, research that is behind the book, we interviewed a number of creative people, and then we selected this particular interview as a sort of a case study for the chapter, which is really interesting, because what we tried to do with this chef, it was to understand a little bit, how his creative process unfolds and try to learn from him. And then I remember when we started the interview, we asked him, like, how do you create your recipes, right? That was the kind of maybe naive question on our hand. I don't know, but he said, recipes are not my concern. I'm not concerned about recipes are just exercise to codify the knowledge that I develop at the end of the process, but it's not what I'm looking for. What he does instead is something that is a combination of analytical thinking and his deep knowledge about, of course, the science of cooking, the art of cooking, and the emotional reasoning and the emotional thinking that is based on his passion for what he does. And also in this case, in particular case, also his love for his land, the culinary tradition is part of. Really what he does, instead of focusing on a recipe, is to meditate on the nature of ingredients, sometimes even the most, if you want, obvious. Like I remember in the interview, he mentioned tomatoes and one of the examples. Like he literally meditates on the quality of the tomatoes. Some of these qualities are actually objective, like even chemical, in the sense of the art science of food, for instance, but some of them are more like emotional. And then he tried to explore these qualities and to contrast them with the qualities of other ingredients. Next thing he does is start to play, to experiment and combine these ingredients in novel ways. And he doesn't really, of course, he has something in mind, but most of it is experimentation, and then he learned from the results and also from the failures. He told us that a lot of my experiments fail, and so the whole process is really very similar to what is now called design thinking, which is about understanding the problem, experimenting, prototyping, testing, and not learning from failure until you land on something that is pleasant for you as the creator and for your customers. So that's the sense of that sentence. That's no recipe for creativity. And so in the chapter, basically, we kind of describe this process in a little bit more details.
It's interesting because obviously creativity can pull from so many different activities. But if we go back to one of the things that you were talking about at the beginning when you were setting it up, the elements of simplicity and perhaps complexity. You also in the book talk a little bit about the ergonomics of simplicity, and you mentioned the Nest thermostat as an example. Could you talk about what you mean by that?
Totally. The Nest is actually a great example of this trade-off. And then you put it in the right way, there's a trade-off. The whole creative endeavor is a trade-off. We have to move from opposite side of the spectrum, combining novelty with familiarity, for instance. This is a key trade-off in design because people like familiar things, of course, because we know them. We are comfortable with what we know, but we also want novelty. And so the question is how much novelty and how much familiarity and how to combine these things. So in the case of Nest, Nest is a company, but specifically in the chapter, we focus on the invention of the thermostat. That was basically, I think, one of their first products. and definitely the one that determined their success at the beginning. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but if for those who listen, but basically it's very simple device in terms of look and feel. It's just a knob. It's very stylish, very beautiful, elegant, but very simple. And then this simplicity is very attractive. Why? Because first of all, it's easy to operate, but that's not the main reason. The reason is that the simplicity of the Nest is attractive because it's not obvious, because there's a lot of complexity that is inside the device or is displaced in the app through which you can control the device. And so the complexity is not eliminated, it's there. It's there, and it is available for the user if the user wants to explore it. If the user doesn't want to explore it, he or she might not just do it. So this degree of freedom of navigating the complexity of the device in the way the user wants, the customer wants, is a great advantage of the Nest. So one suggestion that we provide in the book to designers, learning from these best practices, is that complexity must not be eliminated if it is there, but can be hidden and can be made available on demand. The other thing that is important is that once the user decides that he or she wants to explore this complexity, has to find an easy way to come back. You don't want to enter, in this complex system and then get lost. I'll give you an example. If you remember the old remote, controller for TV remotes, for instance, with all of those buttons, sometimes a lot of people do that, including myself. You push a button, something opens up on the screen, and you don't know how to go back. So you were able to access that complexity, but you're not able to get rid of it. So this design strategy of organizing information at different level of complexity and leaving to the users the ability to navigate these levels is what we call a splitting. And there's a chapter on this one. This is a way to organize information that improves a lot of things, including usability of complex devices.
That's very interesting, because it sounds like you're saying that the access to something has to initially be both beautiful and simple. And then when there is a relationship with it, if someone wants to dive deeper, there's an ability to access that complexity, but hopefully done in such a way that it doesn't become the TV remote, and that you can get back to some level of simplicity. I mean, in many ways, that is customer experience. But also, now you mentioned the spectrum before and trade-offs and so on, but what about if something is pretty darn complex when you start out? Is the mission with design thinking and simple elegance to ensure that it is made simple just for access, or would that be insulting to some people if they're enthusiasts and they want that complexity? Is every situation different?
It is. One of the key challenges is to align the complexity of the user, meaning how much the user is sophisticated and wanted to have that sophistication available to him, and the complexity of the task. I'll give you an example. If we enter, I'm not an airplane pilot, so if I enter the cabin where the pilot works, and I look at all those devices, actually we have this example in the book. For me, it's extremely complex. I just feel lost because I don't know, not even how to operate it. What buttons should I push? Of course, I'm totally ignorant about flying. It's a very complex task. I cannot trivialize that task because the complexity isn't the task. So that's the thing that people in the end know. If the task is complex, even heating, providing heating to your houses, if you have a big space, for instance, you need different temperature, it might change with the season. You might be quite sophisticated at the way you manage your heating system in your house. And some people want to do this, some people don't. So the thing is, either we develop niche product like the cabin dashboard for the pilot, and that level of complexity is relative to the complexity of the user. So the pilot, when the pilot enters the cabin, he or she will find the cabin totally understandable. And maybe, yeah, they still would like to have some improvements here and there, but overall, the level of complexity is aligned. When the product, like the Nest, is a little bit more broader in terms of potential market targets, so we can have very sophisticated users, less sophisticated users, we need to modulate this complexity in a way that they have the freedom to choose. And what complexity do they want to handle? Sometimes it's not that they are not sophisticated. Sometimes we don't have the time. Sometimes we don't have we cannot afford it for whatever reason. Time, money, we don't want it, or even if we could handle it, for instance. So that's what the Nest does. When splitting is the way you can achieve that. But it's very important to understand. That's why design thinking, again, is very important, because it's really about understanding your customer and what they want, what they need. And then to align the complexity of our design with the complexity they can handle. And of course, more sophisticated users will require a more sophisticated design.
Well, that leads me to a number of questions. One that I'm absolutely curious about is what this means to messaging. When we opened the conversation, we did talk about how a lot of messages are lost or can't stand out, and so on and so forth. But the other thing, it makes me wonder, what if you have, so that's one element. What if you have an audience, though, with someone who is new to something and needs to access it with a certain level of simplicity, and yet there's parts of the audience that need a level of complexity as well? So I mean, maybe the thing is we just have to buy the book, but that sounds it sounds like you've covered a lot of very interesting things that it's going on in our brain unconsciously all the time.
Well, yeah, that's in those cases when we need to modulate this complexity, because we might want to serve different audiences with different level of skills. We need to create a system in which there's a hierarchy of levels, in which the top levels, the more superficial one, if you want, are very easy and very accessible. And then there's a door, let me use this metaphor, through which it's like you were exploring a building, and then you open the door and you enter in an environment that is a little bit more interesting, maybe also a little bit harder to navigate. And you enter this environment and you explore. And then maybe there's another door that brings you one level up, like in a video game, if you want. You have layers of, based on your ability. The important thing is that you can always go back, number one. Number two, you don't have to even go inside if you don't want to. So for instance, our mobile phones are like that, or software often is like that, because we have a very easy to use superficial user interface, which is very intuitive, especially after the invention of the touch screen. But then we know that with a phone or with a computer, if you want, you can go inside the app and you can do much more with the app. And then if you have some coding ability, you can even build your app and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to say probably is this, that good design supports learning, and people like to learn when the learning is not too complicated, when the learning comes with small wins. So by allocating information at different level of complexity and by moving gradually through these layers, that's what happens. Users, if they want, they can enjoy these small wins, they can learn. And this is very satisfying. It's part of being human. Learning is such a great experience because humans like to learn new things. Of course, we have to make it not too difficult for them. We have to fill the bridge. If I have to go from this level to this level, I cannot ask people to jump that much. So I have to create ways for them to move from A to B in a gradual fashion. And if they want to go back, anytime they can go back, and they can maybe resume this exploration at another time.
Yeah, I think that is well put. And I think it also lends itself certainly to our digital world. I realize that products and even services are in the physical world, but the way that we access so much in terms of our understanding of brands these days is through the online journey. I just to move into something else that I found quite interesting. You also recommend that you should subtract the obvious and add the meaningful. Now, talk a little bit about that. And again, if you don't mind, talk about it in the context of how that would affect a brand or a brand marketer. I'd be really curious about that, particularly in this era of trying to be more purposeful.
Yeah, so this is first of all, this is a quote that we borrowed from another book, which is John Maeda book on, it's called The Laws of Simplicity. I think it came out in 2008, 2009, those years. But the idea that Maeda has of simplicity is actually very close to what we call good complexity in our book. It's not simplicity for the sake of it. It's this smart simplicity in which things are superficially simple and neat, but they have a lot of interesting, good complexity inside. So this is one of his mantra in the book, is remove the obvious and the meaningful. We kind of explore this aspect in one chapter of the book. One of our strategies called subtract details. With the benefit of insight, I think we should have called this strategy, maybe for a future edition of the book, abstract details more than subtract, because it's really about identifying those details in a customer experience, in the product design. They really need to stand out, and you cannot get rid of them. The rest is normally redundant or even noisy in the design. That part, the noise, it just adds to the cacophony, just adds to the complexity, the bad complexity this time. So since you mentioned marketers, and I can provide you an example, something that now is kind of common. You can even find reviews on YouTube when you buy something new, and they call it the unboxing experience. Like until a few years ago, this was not an issue, because it was just a box and your product was inside. You received the product and the box was not that important. But now we know that companies, and Apple is one of the first who did this, pay particular attention in how they package the product, and not just for the sake of minimizing their environmental impact, which is important, but also for the sake of starting a user experience that begins the very moment we receive this object in our hands. So the unboxings really guide us through the management of the first impression, I would say. Is the first encounter between the user and the product. So what is the meaningful here? For instance, Apple, when the iPod came out, one thing that they did was to make sure that the device in the box came fully charged to you. And this is why is that? They could have saved their time and a little bit of energy if they didn't bother to charge the device in the factory, right? But they understood that the first thing a user wants to do, especially when it's a new gadget, is to use it right away, right? I wanna use it right away, and it has to be charged. I don't want to wait, I don't know, 3 hours for the charging of the battery, of this device. So it's a little thing that made a big difference. So this thing, the excited understanding what are the sources of excitement in the unboxing experience for the particular product. Of course, this might change depending on the product. Providing a product that can be used right away. These are, for instance, example of the meaningful. What is the obvious that we can get rid of? Of course, unnecessary packaging, plastic, these things that people are more sensitive about, rightly so, in terms of their impact on the environment. The other thing, for instance, is the user manual that nobody will read or wants to read. Now these products increasingly come without user manual. First of all, the user manual can be online if you really want it. It's another example of splitting this one if you want, because if you want to know, I don't know, whatever technical requirements or features this device has, you can go online and you can dig into it. But if you don't need to do that, why do you want to give me a piece of paper that I'm going to throw in a garbage? I'm not going to read. It's just going to be an annoyance, right? So this is just a quick example. I think in general, what we can say is that when we try to do this design by subtraction, we are trying, and the unboxing is a good example for this, we try to transform what is an object into an experience. So a box into the unboxing, because there's a little process there that adds to the customer satisfaction, and we should be mindful of how that process unfolds.
Now that was well said. That it adds to the experience, and I think that obviously certainly with brands, we are living in many ages, and one of them is an age of experience for sure. I have two last questions for you, and at first I wasn't sure I knew the answer to this one. Now that we've had a conversation, I actually might, but I find it very interesting that in addition to being the Associate Dean for Global Programs at St. John's, that you're a professor in the Department of Computer Science. And I initially thought, wow, how do you combine, computer science with elegant design concepts? But I think that our whole conversation has proved just that. But if you want to just talk about that for a minute, I'd love to hear it. And then I have one final question for you.
Totally. I think if I think about this question, so first of all, this is relevant in computer science because there's already research going on the importance of the aesthetics in for instance, human-computer interaction is one of the fields where this is studied, or visualization of information is another one. There's a lot of great work in which scholars have tried to put together, computers produce numbers, so produce a lot of information in terms of digital numbers, analytics. And the problem, however, is how a human can interpret this information without being inundated by numbers. So that's why we have a lot of beautiful interface. We have a lot of increasing number of higher quality information dashboard that are used by decision makers to facilitate their process of basing their decisions on the numbers. And this layer, this aesthetic layer, is proven to be very effective at facilitating that process of interpretation of the information. So if we package information in a way that is more accessible, that could have a positive impact on, for instance, our decision-making process. In general, that's the whole point that we make in the book. So beauty as a purpose, and maybe as many purposes, it's not just one, but one purpose that he has, and we have found evidence of this in other studies, not our research, in other fields like I mentioned, cognitive psychology, but also biology, that was really surprising for me to learn, for instance. That beauty, one way we can think of why beauty exists is because it helps us to process information. That's what it does, because he exposes us to complexity, but in a way that is enjoyable, is not harmful. So our mind can use that stimuli, those stimuli to explore and to enjoy the exploration without, feeling the fatigue of doing that. That's especially art does that.
Yes, and we all have our favorite periods of what we would call beauty. Well, look, I mentioned a last question, and I would just say that I've always found that writing a book is always a journey, and even though we may go in knowing our subject or even knowing what it is that we want to express, there's always a lot of unexpected things that happen along the way. So I'd be curious what insights came about for you in writing Elegant Design, or what surprises popped up that you had no idea that they would come up.
I learned a lot for sure, and you put it in a perfect way. It's a journey, and this one was actually quite a long journey because it's very multidisciplinary. So we had to read a lot of contribution from different fields. Sometimes we had to, learn things that were totally new to us. Because, for instance, my background is in engineering, computer engineering. My co-author background is in architecture, so it was a little bit better positioned than me, of course, for his background. But this was not enough. There was a lot of cognitive science. There was a lot of neuroscience. And we cite this science in the book. We provide references, but in a way that is very accessible. Actually, every chapter has always like a section that we call the science of whatever is the strategy. So the science of symmetry, for instance, the science of splitting. And we provide in a very accessible way, evidence from research in different fields that prove that particular design strategy works. For me, two things probably stand out. The first is that started to develop this conviction that most of our reasoning is actually aesthetic. If we reflect on the way we decide, the way we make choices in life, this idea that we are rational thinkers is a little bit partial. In reality, there's a lot of aesthetic consideration that we do, and these aesthetic considerations have a big influence in the way we make decisions. So this was one big source of learning for me. So I would say probably the way we optimize, if we optimize on emotion, because that's the other takeaway for me. That most of this aesthetic reasoning is based on our emotional brain, more precisely on how we integrate the information we get from the senses, or some kind of objective information, our previous knowledge that might be also analytical or even academic sometimes, and our emotion. The emotion is the final test. When we think that something feels right, even the most complicated cost-benefit analysis has that type of validation at the end. And so the importance of emotion, the importance of our senses, the knowledge that we develop from our senses is important. And I'm very vocal about this point, because I think we have a risk. The risk is that we live in a world that is increasingly more, with COVID, we had even an acceleration in that sense. It's always more symbolic and more immaterial, more digital. And this comes with a lot of convenience, of course, and a lot of advantages. But at the same time, that question, this natural ability we have of learning from the experience. When I say experience, I mean the experience of crashing literally with the physical world. And this also from the social point of view, having texting to someone is a totally different interaction that like the one we are having now, which is very close to face. And if we were face to face, probably would have been even better. And when we sacrifice that for convenience of using digital information, we are at a loss. And we lose a particular skill that is our human ability to learn from the senses. So it's something that I think we should reflect on and be mindful of, and probably whoever is in charge of developing the technology that we use should also be mindful of this. Maybe developing technology that instead of suppressing, compressing that skill, actually enhance it, and it can be done, I guess.
Well, let's certainly hope so. But it sounds like, in spite of it all, that we are human, and the last thing that we want to lose is our humanity. And as much as everything else can help us, I think you're right. We respond to beauty, we respond to emotions, and I also think that there's a lot of marketers out there that intuitively understand that. But most importantly, I think there's a lot of consumers out there that want to respond to that. So it's been an amazing half hour that we've covered some very heady topics. And I look forward to the introduction of the book in the United States. And I know our European colleagues have it available already. And absolutely looking forward to continuing the conversation with you, Luca. Thank you for sharing an amazing subject so well in such a short time.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It was a pleasure for me to have this conversation as well.
The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward. Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal